Go ahead.
One more person admitting. Great. Yes, very good to see everyone again.
Heel goed om iedereen hier te zien vandaag.
Wait, you don't have to translate. So.
No, yeah, okay.
But it's still nice here. Yeah, so actually my first question will be if there's anyone in need of translation. Als iemand vertaling nodig heeft, dan mag je mij wel een direct berichtje sturen in de chat. Dan weten we meteen dat of Graham voor ons gaat vertalen. Yeah, so actually my first question will be if there's anyone in need of... Zo, gemute. Dus dat mag je wel naar mij sturen als je vertaling wil. En dan zal ik laten weten aan Graham of hij moet gaan vertalen of niet. But I will start already with the introduction. Until now, people haven't sent me a message yet. Okay, yeah, we just were saying that it's very nice to see some familiar faces from Tuesday. I'm so very glad that you could join again, or if it's the first time, welcome in the meeting. We're happy that you could make it today. So as you know by now, you're joining the Mission Month from Ichthus here in Antwerpen. And we're hosting different talks and different activities, which I will share about at the end as well, which the next activity will be. And Tuesday, we had a very good start of the Mission Month with Chris, who was sharing about suffering. And I think if I speak for myself, I really enjoyed that and learned some very, very helpful insights from him. And if you still want to watch it, you can do that. On Facebook, you will find a stream link on YouTube. But today we're heading into a different topic, and we will do that together with Erin. And you can see her beautiful blue sweater. And I will share a little bit more about you, Erin, if that's okay. She is born in Texas, but she has lived in Florida. We were just speaking about geographics. She can explain more, but we heard that she lives near a beach and it's very nice weather, so we are a little bit jealous of you, I think. And she used to be a school teacher, but now she's actually, just like us, a student again, studying for a PhD, and she does this in Aberdeen in Scotland. And she was studying modern American church growth movements. It's a long study. She's also been involved with other mission weeks in Belgium, and she really has a big heart for students and for Belgium as a nation, so we're glad that she is here. She teaches at a Bible school in Florida as well. And she also just published a book, and that's explaining how to discover and tell stories about your own journeys. So we're hoping that we can hear a bit of your journey. Some hobbies and things she likes to do is photography, baking, and like we said, walking on the beach. So now you have a bit of an idea who Erin is. And we are really excited to hear from you. Thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here with you. I wish I could be there in person, especially in such a beautiful place as Antwerp.
Yeah, we're hoping next year you can be here.
Me too.
Yeah, you can start. The floor is yours.
Well, again, welcome. Thank you all for coming. I do have a screen share, so let me give it. Hopefully I've got pictures. If you were here on Tuesday, Chris had some wonderful pictures, so I might not do quite as well as him. But I'd love for us to talk a little bit more about this question we're looking at tonight. Here we are. And tonight we are here to talk about a very important question. Is the Bible sexist? It's an important question for us to start asking now, because now is a time when a lot of people are asking some really important questions about sexism. And since the Bible has had so much influence, it's worth asking, is the Bible part of the problem? But I realize this is a very sensitive subject. And so thank you all for being brave enough to come tonight and have this conversation. It's easy to see how much pain sexism has caused and feel like it's just easier not to say anything at all. But I think it is important that we be willing to ask the question, and I hope we can have a real conversation. As a Christian, I'm going to suggest that I don't think the Bible is sexist. I actually think the Bible can give us a better understanding of who men and women are and how we can treat all people with respect. But you might reach a very different conclusion from me, and if so, I'd love to talk to you after we finish. I'd also like to start by acknowledging something very important, which is that sexism isn't just about women. As a woman, I'm going to be reading the Bible through a woman's eyes to some extent, but sexism is something that affects everyone. As difficult as this last year has been, I think one of the interesting positive things that's happened is the kinds of things that have happened with fathers and small children. A lot of my friends who have children have said it's been really wonderful to have some more time at home. In my culture, because of sexism here in America, people often think that raising children is mostly the mother's job to some extent. They won't always say that, but people seem to think that. So, for example, it's very hard for men to have much time off work when there's a new baby in the house. But over the last year, lots of men have been home and some really great things have happened. I heard a story about one man who was on a Zoom meeting at work one morning, and there was this little tiny head that kind of popped up at the bottom of the screen and got down and then came back up. And my friend asked him about it later and said, okay, what was that? Well, he said, my son, every morning when he wakes up, he's gotten used to very first thing, getting a big old hug from his dad. And how nice that a work meeting didn't have to get in the way of that. These same friends are a little worried that when we go back to normal, whatever that is, that some of those pressures on men to be away from home working a lot will come back. And they're hoping, and I am too, that we can find a way that is a little more balanced and a little more fair to everyone. But as we talk about this question and we ask, is the Bible sexist? We also need to acknowledge that sometimes we can think we know things about the Bible just from our culture. The Bible has influenced a lot of people. And so you see images from the Bible in art, in a lot of films. And some of these works of art or films are really amazing. But at the same time, they're not the same as reading it for yourself. These are someone else's ideas about it, someone else's interpretation. As Natanya said, I used to teach literature. And one thing I always told my students is, as wonderful as our discussions are, and I hope we'll have another wonderful discussion tonight, you still have to read it for yourself. If you got one of the goodie bags from Ictus, you actually have a copy of one of the Bible stories in the bag. It's Mark Uncovered, which is one of the stories that's told in the Bible about Jesus. It's actually one of the earliest stories about Jesus. Scholars think it was written maybe 30 or 40 years after the event, so it's a very important record that I would encourage you to read for yourself. If you don't have a copy of that and would like one, please get in touch with Ictus. They would love to get a copy to you. And if you'd like to read it and discuss it with others, they can also help you with that. But please don't take my word for things. Please read the Bible and decide for yourselves. And as you read, one of the first questions I think we need to ask is the Bible giving us pictures of men and women that are like all those sexist ideas we have? Does it present men and women according to those sexist stereotypes, or does it give us something else? Sometimes men and women can seem pretty sexist in the Bible, the way they're described. That's not a big surprise because the Bible was written in very sexist cultures. And I like that it's being honest about that. It's telling us honestly what goes on in those kinds of situations. It also tells us honestly when people are hurting because they don't understand each other and they don't treat each other well. But that's not all the Bible tells us. The Bible also gives us another way to understand men and women. So, for example, in the very first part of the Bible, the very first chapter, it says, in the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. What does that tell us? Well, that tells us that God created both men and women in his own image. Men and women both reflect God's nature and God's being. They seem pretty equal in God's eyes. Now, when we read a couple of pages later, we see that women were created to be men's helper. Now, that can sound very sexist. And as a woman, sometimes it bothers me to read that. It makes you think almost that women are just there to help the men. They're not really the main event. Women are just kind of in the background. But that's actually not what the word means. When you look at the word in Hebrew, which is the language that part of the Bible originally was written in, that word helper suggests powerful, life-saving help that often comes at a moment of great need. The God of the Bible uses that word to describe himself, and he uses that word help to describe what he does for human beings when they're in a crisis and need help. So if that's the word the Bible has for women, I don't feel so bad about it at all. It sounds like women have an important part to play, and that's very good news. It also sounds like men, you can take a breath here because that means the pressure is not all on you. Whatever this life is, we are in it together and we can help each other. And throughout the Bible, you see lots of stories of women doing some amazingly helpful things, providing powerful life-saving help, sometimes that goes way beyond what was normal in their culture. Women lead armies. Women serve as judges. Women come up with all kinds of clever plans that require courage but save lives and help people know who God is. Sometimes women act as prophets, which is a word the Bible uses for someone who speaks for God. They tell us who God is, and that's sometimes some of the most powerful information people can get to know what God's heart is in a particular situation. God doesn't seem afraid to let women speak for him, even in cultures that didn't particularly trust or listen to women. God seems to trust women. But it's not just the images of women. The images of men that we get are also a little different from what you might expect. In my culture, we have this idea that men are strong and silent. When hard things happen, they just find a way to make it work. But that's not the image of men you get in the Bible. There are men like David, the warrior king, or Jeremiah, the prophet, that express powerful emotion. These men are not afraid to ask for help. And when you read their writings, they're incredibly beautiful, and they express, as well as almost anyone has, what it's like to be frustrated, what it's like to be afraid, what it's like to need help, and to be willing to ask for it. Christians will sometimes read their words when they're praying and asking for help because they've given us a powerful picture of what it looks like to express all your emotions and to ask for help when you need it. That's very good news for all of us. We can all admit when things aren't working so well. And when we get to the stories about Jesus, the news gets even better. Stories about Jesus are told in books like the book of Mark that some of you might have a copy of now. And we see men and women working together in ways that feel very healthy. Jesus involves women in his work from start to finish. Women are there offering money, women offer practical help, and women sit and listen to his teaching just like the men do. That wasn't normal in their culture. Women's education wasn't a big priority. They didn't think it was important. But Jesus let women sit and listen and learn just like anyone else. That's pretty incredible. Because women were so involved in Jesus's work, a lot of the stories that we know about Jesus actually come to us from women. For example, Christians every year celebrate Christmas, the story of Jesus's birth. A lot of the stories we talk about must have come from his mother Mary. She was the only one there. And similarly, towards the end of the story, when Jesus is on trial for his life and he is suffering on the cross, women were the ones who stuck by him. The men were hiding because they were afraid, and they were afraid with good reason. The Roman government that was putting Jesus to death might very well have done the same to them. But the women stayed by his side. When Jesus was on trial, the women couldn't say anything to help him because it was such a sexist culture. A woman couldn't testify in court. She couldn't speak up in a trial. People thought women were so silly, so prone to believe ridiculous things, no one would believe them or even listen. But they stayed by Jesus' side anyway, offering what help they could. After Jesus died, 2 days later, let's take a look and see, because we learned some really incredible news from women. It's in Mark chapter 16. If you have the copy of Mark or Marcus Uncovered, it's right near the end of that book. If not, you can look it up in another Bible, or you can look it up on Google. It's available. But at this part of the story, as we said, Jesus has been put on trial, an unfair trial. He's been put to death, and a pretty horrible death. And 2 days later, the women are going to try to give him a proper burial. So let's see what they say, what their story tells us. In Mark chapter 16, it says, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go and anoint his body. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee, and there you will see him just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now, at first, you might read this and think this sounds pretty sexist. I mean, it's a bunch of women who are scared and don't know how to move a heavy rock. But let's look at this again. Remember, it took a lot of courage to show up at this point. The men are hiding, and with good reason. If they didn't, they might find themselves in the next tomb. But the women go anyway. They think all hope is lost. They think Jesus is dead and gone forever, but they go anyway. They're not even sure if they're going to be able to do anything when they get there, but they go anyway, trying to do the only thing they think they can do. That's the stuff that real heroes need. That's the kind of thing that forms all the best films we watch, things like Lord of the Rings, when people try their best when all things look hopeless. And because they do, they get to tell the best news that's ever been heard. Jesus is alive again. Women weren't trusted. They couldn't have said this in a court of law. If you were making this story up, you would never have the most important news told by women, because no one in their culture would have believed it. But women were the ones who were assigned to tell that story, and Christians are reporting honestly that women were the ones who heard it. They're also telling us very honestly the men weren't there because they were afraid. That's not something I would probably tell about the leaders of my church if I were trying to get people to come, but Christians seem to tell the story honestly. And it says at the end, they didn't say anything to anyone, but it's kind of a joke almost. We know they did. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this story here. And the other Gospels tell us what happened when they did. Everything changed. So when we look at stories like this, we see women are trusted in some pretty amazing ways. There's a writer in Oxford who said some really wonderful things, and I'd like us to see what she says about the way Jesus and women interacted. She said, perhaps it is no wonder that the women were first at the cradle and last at the cross. They had never known a man like this man. There has never been another. A prophet and teacher who never nagged at them, never flattered or coaxed or patronized, who never made arch jokes about them, who took their questions and arguments seriously, who had no axe to grind and no uneasy male dignity to defend, who took them as he found them and was completely unself-conscious. That sounds like really good news to me. That's the way we would all hope to treat other people, exactly as we find them, with no self-consciousness. To treat people seriously, to be respectful. It's a beautiful picture of how men and women can interact. When we see this, I think it gives us all hope. As a woman, it gives me hope because Jesus is God himself. He gives us a picture of how God wants women to be treated. But it also gives me real hope that men and women can interact in healthy ways like this. But when I think about the real world, I can tell you that's not how I'm always treated. Sometimes it can be almost funny the way that sexism influences our thinking. I can tell you one story that happened to me a few years ago. As I said, I live in Florida, and there's actually a river very close by that goes out to the sea right near the beach. After we had a couple of storms blow through, the water was rising and animals were looking for higher ground. So I'm trying to relax in my garden one afternoon, and I'm looking out and I see a poisonous snake trying to find higher ground. Yes, that's exactly how I was feeling. And so I get on the phone and I try to call someone in the city, anyone who can come and help. There was no one. I keep getting sent from one phone to another. People are like, oh, yeah, that sounds terrible. Eventually, I gave up when I got to this one woman who's working for the wildlife department. And I will never forget the unhelpful thing she said to me. What she said in that moment of crisis was, why don't you get your husband to kill it? I won't tell you the words that were going through my mind right then. I didn't say them, thankfully. But seriously, what is wrong with her? Why would she think the problem is that there's not a man in my house? Most men I know are just as scared of snakes as I am, and with good reason. I don't think you guys get any special training in how to handle snakes. I was looking for someone with special training who could come out and handle snakes. Maybe I'm wrong, guys. Does this sound like something you would really want to go out and tangle with? I don't think so. The other thing I would say is if I had a husband, wouldn't you hope I loved the guy and didn't want him to go out and tangle with a poisonous snake? I don't know. In my moment of crisis, I was just kind of struck by how much these sexist assumptions can sometimes get in the way of us doing what needs to be done. And sometimes we can assume the worst things about other people. But sometimes it's not that funny. When I think about how I've been treated, sometimes the worst ways I've been treated have been by people who say they're Christians. I've been ignored. I've been silenced. I've been overlooked. I've been pushed to the side. I've been judged. I've been told it's really not okay to be all that clever because I'm a woman. I've been told people don't really want to listen to what I have to say. That's not a very good feeling. But one of the things about the Me Too movement and other conversations we've had is that it makes us all aware that we all carry these ideas in our head to some extent. And if I'm being really honest with you, when I think about how I've treated other people, sometimes I've ignored them, silenced them, overlooked them, or pushed them off to the side. It's not a very fun thing to have to face, but maybe I'm the only one on this call who has to admit that, but probably not. Most of us are becoming really aware of how we tend to not see or mistreat other people. And while that can be a good thing, it leads to some real questions about how we respond. I think our culture has done a good job of highlighting the problem, but they haven't really told us what to do about it. We want to take these stories seriously, but we'd also like for there to be some way that we can all heal and learn and become better people. I think that's part of why we get so uncomfortable when we talk about things like cancel culture. It takes these stories seriously, but it doesn't really give us a way forward. It seems like if all we're doing is tuning out bad voices, then we're just all afraid to speak. And it can really not give us the healing and the hope that we're looking for. So how do we move forward? Well, let me suggest the women's story, this very old story the women told at the tomb, tells us how we can move forward in a really amazing way. Let's think about this for a second. Why was Jesus in a tomb? Jesus was God himself, become a human being. And like a lot of us who are human beings, he was ignored, silenced, overlooked, pushed off to the side. People didn't see him for who he was any more than we see each other sometimes for who we are. And when we're hurting, we never have to wonder if he knows what that's like. He does. And even beyond that, Jesus allowed himself to be put on trial, to be accused of things he didn't do, to be tortured, to be put to death. He experienced the worst that human beings can do, so that we never have to wonder if he understands. But he's also shown us how seriously he takes it when we hurt. He has himself taken on the punishment for all the mistakes you or anyone else has ever made, so we don't have to stay guilty forever. We can find a way to walk forward. Because the women tells us that Jesus is alive. He is risen. He's not here. This is so important because remember, Jesus has experienced the worst that humanity can dish out. He's experienced all the pain and all the heartache, but it doesn't stop him. He comes back. God's love is the most powerful force on earth. It is stronger than any mistake you or anyone else has ever made. Jesus is risen. He's alive. That means that even the places in your heart that feel dead, the mistakes you wish could go away, those don't have to define you forever. He can give you new life and a new healthy identity that looks more like that beautiful picture he always intended for us to be, where we relate to each other in respect and in wholeness and in grace. Jesus changes everything. He's changed everything for me. As I told you, I was told it is not okay to be clever because I'm a girl. This girl went on to earn 2 master's degrees from Oxford. I was told no one really wants to listen. I'm here talking to you now. Jesus changed everything for me. And if you keep reading these women's stories, you'll see he changed everything for them too. Those women who no one would listen to got to carry the most important news that he could possibly give to the world. Those men who were hiding and afraid became brave leaders of a church who told those women's stories to anyone who would listen, even the people they'd been hiding from. Jesus changes everything. He can change everything for you too. And that gives me real hope. That no, the Bible is not sexist. In fact, the Bible is what helps us to see each other in a more fair and a more honest way. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your questions and hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was, yeah, so good to hear. And I really like how you started off with saying it's not just about women, but it comes in so many different concepts. And yeah, it's not supposed to make women feel better than men, but we're together and we can treat each other with love. And yeah, you ended very powerfully with sharing who Jesus is and how he changed things for you. So thank you for sharing that part of your story too. It's really good. So we would like to receive any questions that people might be having. And you can feel free to send those in the chat. And if you want it more private, you can also send them to me and I will ask them to Erin. So yeah, have a moment, think about it and let us know. I will also look at the live stream.
And as we're waiting, I'll put my email address in the box. So if you have a question you don't want to ask, you can certainly get in touch with me later. I'd love to hear from you tonight, but if that's not okay, you can certainly reach out to me another time.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question for you.
Okay.
In the Bible, you hear it's always about God being the father. How do we interpret that? Like, is God a mother figure as well to me? Or sometimes when I have issues, I need to find my father, but for other things, I know I need to go to my mother. Can God be both of those to us?
That is a really good question. I would say yes. In fact, Jesus specifically compares God to a mother at one point. He talks about when he's standing over Jerusalem at one point and, talking about how one day it will be destroyed, he weeps and he says, I've wanted like a mother to gather you under my wings. And there are a few other places where you see God similarly describe himself as like a mother hen kind of brooding over babies. So there is certainly something like a mother that you will often find in God. And we do see that language of father and son a lot because that in their culture was the language of inheritance, of blessing, of titles. Now, what's interesting is that in their culture, women can also be a son in the sense that women can inherit blessings and titles and honor too. So you'll definitely see that as one reason why they do it. But I would also add the other part of the way we talk about God are Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the words for the Holy Spirit, depending on which language you're looking at, are either gender neutral or feminine. So there is one part of God that doesn't have a clear gender marking. And for me, that's nice to know that, Father and Son have a gender imagery, but there is another side to God as well. And that might explain why we see it coming up where he can compare himself to a mother. So yes, I think we don't want to get too hung up on our ideas about what our earthly father or our earthly mother could handle. God can handle all of who you are, whoever you are. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always helpful to see things more in the context. So that time that might be the way they spoke. So it always helps to understand some stories. Is there anyone else who would like to ask something to Erin? Chris would like to ask something. Let me see if I can unmute you.
Yeah, I suppose my question would be, what would you say to people, to young women who feel that they've been belittled or treated badly by leaders in a church, particularly because of their gender? What do you do with that once it's happened to you?
It's a good question, and it certainly has happened to me sometimes too. So the first thing I would say is I understand. That's happened to me as well. I think the first thing I need to know is that Christian leaders, just like any of us, are flawed. They have a lot of wonderful qualities, but they can make mistakes like anyone. So I wouldn't assume that just because a Christian leader has treated me a particular way that they necessarily represent God. I think sometimes we think they do, that our Christian leaders, are how we come to understand God, but they're human beings like any of us, and they will make mistakes. And when it comes to that, I think it is a mistake. No one deserves to be treated badly. No one deserves to be ignored. And I would also encourage people that if that bad treatment has gone as far as abuse or something else, you need to report it. We don't have to put up with that. That's not something that it's part of your Christian duty to accept. When stuff happens, we can find answers and we can find help. So that would be the first thing that I would say. Second thing I would say would be to seek out other people in your church who can affirm you for who you are. And sometimes you might even need to find a different church where people will treat you in a way that's respectful. Hopefully you can find a way to talk to that person and let them know. Sometimes when people have said something to me, like any of us, they don't realize what they're saying or they don't mean it in that way. So sometimes you can talk to them and they can learn and they can listen. And I hope that would be the case. But if leaders won't listen and they won't learn, then maybe it's time to find someone else who can honor who you are. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, we got a thumbs up. So it's good. Let me see. Oh, there's one more. Would Bible commentaries be a good place to go when problems like this arise? And I think that's about, I'm wondering if it's about what Chris just asked or if it's about the Bible is sexist. Maybe you can add to that question.
That's a tricky question to answer because there are different kinds of problems that can come up. If the problem is that people don't understand the Bible, then some commentaries might be helpful to clear up what the language is and what the language isn't. Though I will say it is interesting. A lot of commentaries are, like we said, written by human beings who have their own opinions, and they disagree about a lot of things. So depending which commentary you read, it might or might not have a particular opinion. All of them do. So it's worth reading a couple before you make up your mind. When it comes to problems with people applying the Bible differently, that would be a situation where I think it's most helpful just to talk to the person and ask them what their ideas are. Maybe try to help them understand how different behaviors or different choices are affecting other people, and see if there's a way that you can move forward. So if it's a Bible understanding question, yeah, commentaries can be really helpful resources, some of them probably better than others. But if it's a problem with how people behave or what people do in church, that's a slightly different problem. So it might be worth doing something more in terms of, like you would with any problem with people, talking to them, seeing if you can find a different way to work forward that helps everyone.
Yes, thank you. And there was another question saying, what do you think of women preaching in the church if you think about Paul's epistles?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a really important question. And I think that's something a lot of churches are wrestling with, because the thing about Paul is he wrote a lot of epistles and he says slightly different things at different points. So, for example, in his letter to the Corinthians, letter is just a funny word for epistles. When he writes to them, at one point he says, yeah, I don't let women speak in this church. And then a couple chapters later, he says, but when women are standing up and praying, they need to have their head covered. Wait, what? Are women supposed to speak or aren't they? And in the same way, when we look at what Paul actually writes, for example, in the book of Romans, he talks about this woman named Phoebe who's going to go to the Roman church. She's probably actually carrying the letter to the Romans to them, which is really interesting because that means she would have been the one they would have asked questions if they didn't know what Paul meant somewhere. So she would have actually probably had been the first person giving a commentary on Romans, which I think is really amazing. And he says, this woman, Phoebe, is coming. Please, honor her and help her in her ministry in any way that you can. If Paul really had questions about women working in church, it's amazing that he doesn't say a whole lot. Help her if she's doing this, help her if she's doing that. So we do see that he seems to work with women very well a lot of times. Sometimes he'll say something and then do something slightly different. And so Christians have very different opinions about women speaking or preaching because they're not sure which one of those things he was accommodating their culture and which one he meant to be a more universal practice. So people reach different conclusions about that. I've been on both sides of that question at different points in my life, so I can respect people on either side. Personally, I'm at a point where I don't think there is a problem with women preaching, but as I said, I can totally respect people who do. I think what's most important is when we have these discussions, we go back to that image of how Jesus and women interacted. They were respectful. They saw each other for who they were. They weren't trying to defend themselves. They were trying to honor each other. And I think as Christians, if we are doing that in our churches, we can come to different opinions about questions like women preaching. But if we're not respecting each other and we're not seeing each other for who we are, then it really almost doesn't matter what we do with questions like women preaching. We have other things I think we need to address first. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, that's good. Thank you. And another question is kind of goes along with Chris's question. What can you do as a woman if you are treated disrespectfully or looked down upon, and then not just in the church context, but in life?
That's a really important question that I think we're starting to get some different answers on. And that's one of the positive things that I think has come out of a lot of these conversations about sexism. The first thing I would say is you need to know that that's not okay. It's not okay for people to treat you that way. I think for a long time, women have allowed themselves to be treated that way and not really said anything, or maybe thought it was okay because it seemed normal to us for too long. Now that we're starting to tell these stories, I think we can be more aware of when we're not being treated well. And when you're not being treated well, it depends on where you are. If, for example, it's at work, there needs to be someone there who you can talk to. start finding out what the situation is. Of course, talk to the person, just like in church, people make mistakes and sometimes they don't know. And if they're willing to listen and change, that's a really positive thing. But if they're not, you might need more help than that. You might need to talk to someone at your work. You might need to talk to a counselor. You might need to talk to someone in your church who can help you figure out what your feelings are and what you'd like to do next. But you don't have to put up with that kind of behavior. It's not okay. At some point, I think the wonderful thing about Jesus is that he teaches us that any of us, anytime we're feeling hurt or not treated well, he understands. And so I would also encourage you, talk to Jesus about it. Let him know what's on your heart. And hopefully at some point, he will help you be free from some of that pain, not only by getting stronger yourself, but by being able to forgive, by being able to let that person go and move on with your own life and achieve all the wonderful things that you want to achieve and become the person that you're meant to become, whether or not they're able to understand it.
Thank you.
These are great questions.
Yes, they're on a roll. There's no new questions anymore, but you can still send them in if you want. It could also be about something different. Erin is a very wise woman, so take advantage of her being here. No, I think the questions are mostly answered, which is great. Yeah, for the rest of our time, Erin has sent us some questions that we can discuss together. So you are free to, stay and have a chat in a bit of a smaller group, which might be easier than in such a big group. But if you, prefer to leave after this, then that's fine too. We're very happy that you were here. There's one more thing that I would like to ask you, and I will send a link in the chat. And this is a feedback formula. I don't know. So you can let us know what you thought about the chats, and there's many more coming, so then we can adjust something. Let me find it. Yes, there we go. Okay. Well, we're finished, I think, with the talk. So you can feel free to stay. But if you have other things to do, feel free to leave now. The next event will be on Monday, where we're going to play some games here in Antwerp. So if you are here, you can join us. And otherwise, there will be a talk again on, when was it? I think Wednesday. Okay. On Wednesday, we have another talk. Okay, well, thank you for being here, and I wish you a very nice evening. And feel free to stay if you want to continue discussing.
It's nice to see you all. So how is everyone tonight?
Good.
Good.
And thank you for the talk.
You're welcome.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Was that new, or was that something you had heard before?
I don't know if I ever heard something about it from a Christian perspective, let's say. because at least in my studies, I do a lot with, for example, #MeToo or so. So we learn a lot about that, but yeah, that's not Christian perspective or so. So that's what I like, and yeah.
What is it that you study?
Sorry.
What is it that you study?
Ja, het is called agogische wetenschappen, and there is no English word for it, but it looks a lot like educational science. So yeah, that's shortly what it is, and I want to become a coach, so that's why I'm studying it. So yeah.
Oh, interesting.